Some nights, the cold doesn't just bite, it takes. And some choices, no matter how far you run, eventually find their way back home. Trenna Vale had spent 20 years alone in the Montana mountains, building a life of silence and solitude, miles from anyone who might ask questions. She thought she'd left her past, buried in these hills. But on a bitter January night, two desperate women appeared at her barn door, half frozen and running from horrors they couldn't speak. One had bruises that told a story. The other couldn't stop shaking. Taking them in seemed like simple kindness, but it would change everything Trenna thought she knew about survival, about mercy, and about the secrets these mountains had been keeping. What were they running from that was worse than freezing to death? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at 7,200 feet, where the lodgepole pines thinned out and the wind carried voices from a long way off. Trenna Vale had built it herself over the course of 2 summers, 20 years back, when her hands were steadier and her reasons for being alone were still fresh enough to wake her at night. She'd chosen the location deliberately far enough from the county road that you couldn't hear traffic, close enough to the ridgeline that she could see weather coming from 50 miles away. The structure was simple. 12 by 20 feet of hand-peeled logs, chinked with moss and clay she'd dug from the creek bed. A metal roof that sang when it rained and groaned under snow. One room that served as kitchen, living space and bedroom, with a loft for storage she rarely used. The wood stove squatted in the center, a cast-iron beast she'd hauled up the mountain in pieces on a borrowed mule. That stove was the heart of everything. Without it, this high up, you'd be dead by November. She kept the place clean but not fussy. A wooden table she'd built from milled pine, 2 chairs, though she only ever used one, shelves lined with books she'd read so many times the spines had gone soft. A narrow bed with quilts her grandmother had made, back when Trenna still had family who spoke to her. The walking stick by the door, hand-carved from mountain ash, worn smooth by 2 decades of use, leaned against the frame like an old friend. Outside, she'd built a root cellar, a chicken coop, and a barn that was more shed than anything, but it kept her firewood dry and gave her a place to work when the weather turned. She kept no livestock except the chickens. They were enough. She had a garden plot that produced well in the short growing season if you knew what you were doing, and she did. Potatoes, carrots, kale, turnips, things that didn't mind the cold. Twice a month, she made the 2-hour walk down to Calvert's store, a crossroads place where the county road met the fire. Access trail. She bought flour, coffee, sugar, salt, and not much else. The owner, Tom Calvert, had learned years ago not to ask questions. She paid cash, said thank you, and left. That was the extent of her contact with other human beings, and she preferred it that way. People had stopped trying to understand her a long time ago. The few who'd known her before, back when she had a different life, a job, a daughter, they'd either moved on or given up. She didn't blame them. She'd given up on herself, in a way. Not on living, exactly, but on the idea that she deserved more than survival. This mountain, this cabin, this silence, it was penance and sanctuary both. She woke every morning at first light, not because she set an alarm, but because her body had learned the rhythm of this place. She fed the chickens, brought in firewood, made coffee on the stovetop. She spent her days maintaining what she'd built, mending the roof, splitting logs, checking her supplies. In winter, when the snow came hard, she might not see another person for months. That suited her fine. The night it all changed started like any other. January 14th. The thermometer outside her window read 15 below. A hard, clear cold that made the stars look close enough to touch. She'd spent the day reinforcing the chicken coop against a storm the radio said was coming. By evening she was inside, boots off, sitting near the stove with a book she'd read before. The wind had picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not an animal. Something rhythmic and desperate. banging. She set the book down and listened. There it was again, coming from the barn. Her first thought was a branch had come loose, or the door had blown open, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. She pulled her boots back on, grabbed her coat and the walking stick, and lit the kerosene lantern. The wind hit her the moment she stepped. Outside, a wall of cold that stole the breath from her lungs. She pulled her scarf up over her face and moved toward the barn, the lantern swinging in her hand. The banging grew louder as she approached. Definitely the barn door. Someone was hitting it from inside. She lifted the latch and pulled the door open. The wind caught it, nearly tore it from her hand. She stepped inside and raised the lantern. Two women huddled in the corner, half buried in loose hay. Their faces were pale as chalk, their lips blue. One of them, older, maybe late 40s, had her arms wrapped around the other, younger, trying to share what little warmth they had left. They both looked up at her with eyes that held more fear than hope. Trenna didn't waste time with questions. She could see they were minutes from freezing to death. "Can you walk?" The older woman nodded, teeth chattering too hard to speak. The younger one didn't respond, just stared. "Come on then, inside, now." She helped them to. Their feet, they moved like they'd been beaten, slow and stumbling. The older one kept her hand on the younger one's wrist, gripping tight like she was afraid of losing her. Trenna got them across the yard and into the cabin, the wind shoving at their backs the whole way. Inside, she shut the door and bolted it. The warmth of the stove hit them, and both women swayed on their feet. Trenna grabbed blankets from the bed and wrapped them tight, then guided them to sit near the stove. Not too close. You had to warm frostbite slow, or you'd do more damage. She put a kettle on for tea. Her mind was already working through what she knew about hypothermia. Get them warm. Get fluids in them. Check for frostbite on fingers and toes. Keep them awake if possible. The older woman's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the cup Trenna gave her. She sipped it, winced at the heat, sipped again. The younger one, she couldn't have been more than 25, just held the cup and stared into it. "My name's Trenna," she said, keeping her voice calm. "You're safe here. You understand?" The older woman nodded. "Alma," she managed. "This is Dilly. How long were you out there?" "I don't know. Hours. We didn't think we'd make it. Where'd you come from?" Alma glanced at Dilly, then back at Trenna. "North, in the mountains." Alma shook her head, but Trenna saw the bruise on her cheek, dark, purple and fresh, saw the way Dilly's eyes didn't focus on anything, just stared past everything. These weren't women who'd gotten lost on a hike. She gave them more tea, then heated up the stew she'd made the day before. They ate like they hadn't seen food in a while, quickly but careful, like they were afraid it might be taken away. Trenna watched them and said nothing. She'd seen this before. A long time ago in a different life. When they'd finished eating, their color had come back some. Alma's hands had steadied. Dilly was looking around the cabin now, taking it in with wide, uncertain eyes. "There's a storm coming," Trenna said. "Big one, according to the radio. You can stay here until it passes. After that, we'll figure out what's next." Alma's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," Trenna nodded. She pulled some extra blankets down from the loft and made up a sleeping space near the stove. The women settled in without argument, exhausted to their bones. Within minutes, they were asleep. Trenna sat at her table and looked at them. Two strangers in her home. She hadn't had another person in this cabin since she'd built it. Now there were two, and both of them were running from something. She looked at the bruise on Alma's face, the way Dilly kept her hand on Alma's arm, even in sleep. She thought about the fear she'd seen in their eyes. Outside, the wind picked up. The first flakes of snow began to fall. By morning, they'd be snowed in, all three of them, together. Trenna stood and bolted the door, then checked the windows. Whatever those women were running from, it would have to wait. The mountain had them now. She stayed awake after they'd fallen asleep, sitting in her chair with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. The stove ticked as the metal expanded and contracted. Snow hit the windows in soft whispers. She studied the two women in the lamplight, trying to piece together their story from what little she could see. Alma's clothes were worn but sturdy, practical things, not fashion. A heavy wool coat that had seen better years. Boots that were meant for work. Her hair was pulled back in a braid that had come half undone. The bruise on her cheek was fresh, maybe 2 days old. But there were older marks too, if you knew how to look. A faint scar above her left eyebrow, calluses on her hands that spoke of hard labor. Dilly was younger, with a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so gaunt. She wore layers of mismatched clothing, like she'd grabbed whatever was closest. Her hands were raw, fingernails broken. She had the look of someone who'd never quite gotten enough. Not enough food, not enough sleep, not enough kindness. What struck Trenna most was the way they held on to each other, even unconscious. Alma's hand rested on Dilly's shoulder. Dilly's fingers curled around Alma's sleeve. It wasn't romantic, it was survival. They were each other's anchor. Trenna knew that kind of bond. She'd seen it before in the women who came through the shelter, back when she still worked for the county. Women who'd fled with nothing but each other. Mothers and daughters, sisters, friends who'd become family because blood family had failed them. They held on like that, fierce and desperate, because letting go meant facing the dark alone. She stood and moved to the window, careful not to disturb them. The snow was falling heavier now, thick flakes that swirled in the wind. By morning, there'd be 2 feet of new snow, maybe more. The road down the mountain would be impassable. They'd be stuck here for days, possibly a week. Trenna had supplies enough for 1 person through the winter. 3 people would stretch things thin, but they'd manage. That wasn't what worried her. What worried her was the look in Alma's eyes when she'd said they came from the north. The mountains to the north were empty, mostly. National forest, wilderness area, miles of nothing. Except there were rumors. There'd always been rumors. About people living out there, communities that didn't want to be found. She'd heard stories at Calvert's store, bits of gossip that Tom passed along whether you wanted to hear it or not. A religious group, someone had said, living off the grid, self-sufficient. Some people thought it was admirable, others thought it was a cult. Trenna had never paid much attention. She lived off the grid herself, after all. But now, looking at these 2 women, she wondered if the rumors had more truth to them than she'd thought. She finished her coffee and set the cup in the sink. Her walking stick leaned against the wall by the door, its surface smooth from years of use. She'd carved it herself from a branch of mountain ash during her first winter here. It had kept her upright on icy trails, helped her navigate through deep snow, served as a tool and a weapon when needed. It was part of her now, an extension of her own body. She ran her hand along its length, feeling the familiar grain of the wood. 20 years she'd been here, 20 years of silence and solitude. She'd thought she'd found peace, or at least the closest thing to it she deserved. But peace was a fragile thing. She knew that better than most. She checked the door 1 more time, making sure it was secure. Then she dimmed the lamp and settled into her chair, wrapping herself in a blanket. She wouldn't sleep tonight. Not with strangers in her home and a storm closing in. She sat in the near dark and listened to the wind, to the soft breathing of the 2 women by the stove, to the creak and settle of the cabin around her. Outside, the mountain was disappearing under snow. Inside, something had shifted. The careful isolation she'd built for herself had cracked open, and she didn't yet know what that would cost her. Morning came grey and muted. Trenna woke stiff in her chair, the cabin cold enough that she could see her breath. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals. She stood, joints protesting, and added wood. The flames caught quickly, sending warmth back into the small space. Alma and Dilly were still asleep, curled together under the blankets. Trenna moved quietly, putting coffee on, slicing bread left over from 2 days ago. She fried eggs from her chickens and set the table for 3. The normalcy of it felt strange. She hadn't cooked for anyone but herself in 2 decades. Outside, the world had gone white. Snow covered everything: the woodpile, the path to the barn, the trees beyond. It was still falling, thick and steady. Trenna judged they had close to 2 feet already, with more coming. They weren't going anywhere for a while. Dilly stirred first, sitting up slowly. Her eyes darted around the cabin, taking everything in with the wariness of a trapped animal. When she saw Trenna at the stove, she went very still. "Morning," Trenna said, keeping her voice gentle. "Coffee?" Dilly nodded but didn't speak. Alma woke a moment later, and Trenna saw the same fear flash across her face before recognition settled in. They both relaxed slightly, but the tension didn't leave their shoulders. "Breakfast is ready," Trenna said. "Come eat while it's hot." They moved to the table like they weren't sure they were allowed. Trenna served them eggs and bread, poured coffee. They ate in silence, Dilly taking small, careful bites, Alma eating faster, like she was making up for lost time. When they'd finished, Alma finally spoke. "The storm, how long will it last?" 2 days, maybe 3. Radio said, "It's a big system. We're snowed in until it passes, and I can clear a path." "Maybe a week, total." Alma's face went pale. "A week? That a problem?" Alma and Dilly exchanged a look. Something passed between them, a conversation without words. Finally, Alma set down her coffee cup and met Trenna's eyes. "We need to tell you something." Trenna waited. "We came from a place called New Eden. It's a community about 15 miles north of here, religious. The man who runs it, his name is Father Gideon." The way she said the name, it carried weight. Fear and hatred mixed together. "We lived there," Alma continued. "Dilly was born there. I came 15 years ago, when I had nowhere else to go. They took me in, gave me food, shelter, a place to belong. But it wasn't." She stopped, struggling for words. "It wasn't what they said it would be." Dilly spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't let you leave." Trenna leaned back in her chair. "Tell me." Alma's hands twisted together on the table. At first, it seemed good. Everyone working together, sharing everything. Father Gideon preached about building a new world, free from the corruption outside. But there were rules. So many rules. And if you broke them... She touched the bruise on her cheek unconsciously. Women couldn't speak unless spoken to. Couldn't go anywhere without permission. Couldn't question anything, Father Gideon said. He arranged marriages, decided who lived where, controlled every part of our lives. He said it was God's will. "And if someone tried to leave?" Trenna asked. "They were brought back," Dilly said. "Always. And then they were corrected." The word hung in the air like a threat. "Corrected how?" Alma's jaw tightened. "Public punishment, days in isolation, sometimes worse. There was a woman 3 years ago who tried to run. They found her. She disappeared after that. Father Gideon said she'd been sent away for redemption, but no one ever saw her again." Trenna felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd heard stories like this before. Different details, same pattern. Control masquerading as salvation. "How'd you two get out?" "We planned it for months," Alma said. "Dilly worked in the kitchens. She saved extra food, hid supplies. I watched the guard rotations, figured out when the perimeter was least watched. 3 nights ago, we ran. We had one chance, and we took it. We walked for 3 days," Dilly added. "Sleeping during the day, moving at night. We ran out of food, got turned around in the dark. When we saw your barn..." Her voice broke. "You saved our lives," Alma finished. Trenna absorbed this. 2 women escaped from what sounded like a prison dressed up as a commune, on the run for 3 days in winter. They'd been lucky to survive. "They'll be looking for you," she said. "Yes, how many people at this New Eden? Maybe 60. 40 women, 20 men. Most of the men are Father Gideon's inner circle. They do the patrols, enforce the rules. And they know this area. Some of them, they've been here for 10 years. They know the mountains." Trenna stood and walked to the window. The snow was falling heavier now, visibility down to maybe 50 feet. In weather like this, even experienced searchers would struggle. But when the storm cleared, she turned back to the two women. "If they come here, if they find you, what happens?" Alma's voice was flat. "They'll take us back, and they'll make an example of us so no one else tries to leave. And me for harboring you? I don't know. Father Gideon, he's convincing, charismatic. He'll make it sound like we're the ones in the wrong, like you were deceived. But he won't forget. He doesn't let go of anything he considers his." Trenna looked at them both, Alma with her bruised face and steady eyes, Dilly young and frightened but determined. She thought about the easy thing, which would be to send them on their way when the storm cleared, point them toward town, let the authorities handle it. But she knew how that went. She'd seen it too many times. Women reporting abuse, only to be sent back because there wasn't enough evidence, or because the abuser was respected in the community, or because the system moved too slowly and by the time help arrived, it was too late. She thought about the daughter she'd lost, the one she'd failed to protect. "You can stay here," she said, "as long as you need." Alma's eyes widened. "But if they come, let me worry about that. You don't understand. Father Gideon, he's dangerous. He has resources, connections. He won't just give up." "Neither will I." Something shifted in Alma's face. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of it. Dilly reached across the table and took Alma's hand. That afternoon, while the women rested, Trenna went out to check her property. The snow was deep enough now that she needed snowshoes. She made a circuit of the cabin, the barn, the tree line, looking for tracks, signs of anyone approaching. She found them near the north edge of her property, where the pines grew thick. Boot prints, already half filled with fresh snow but still visible. 2 sets, maybe 3. They'd come close, circled around, then headed back the way they'd come. Someone had been here, watching. She followed the tracks as far as she could before the snow obscured them completely. They led north, toward where Alma had said New Eden was located. Trenna stood in the falling snow and looked north into the white. They were out there, searching, and when the storm cleared, they'd be back. She turned and made her way to the cabin. Inside, Alma was teaching Dilly to braid her hair, their heads bent together in the lamplight. They looked up when she entered, and she saw the question in their eyes. "Saw some tracks," she said, brushing snow off her shoulders. "Old ones. Nobody's out there now." It was a lie, and she thought Alma knew it. But Dilly relaxed a little, and that was something. That night, after the women had gone to sleep, Trenna sat at her table and pulled out the items she'd hidden from them earlier. A torn photograph she'd found in Alma's coat pocket while it was drying. 2 young girls, maybe 7 and 9, standing in front of a farmhouse. The edges of the photo were burned, like someone had tried to destroy it but stopped halfway. She turned it over. On the back, in faded ink, * Emma and Lily, summer 1997, *. She looked at Alma, sleeping peacefully for the first time since she'd arrived. She wondered which girl Alma had been, and what had happened to the other one. She tucked the photo back where she'd found it. Some secrets you had to let people tell in their own time. Outside, the wind howled, the cabin creaked and settled, and somewhere to the north, Trenna knew, men were waiting for the storm to break so they could come for what they believed was theirs. She checked the bolt on the door one more time. Then she sat in her chair and kept watch, the way she would every night from now on, until this was finished one way or another. The storm raged for 2 full days. Snow piled against the cabin walls, drifted across the door, turned the world into a white void. Inside, the 3 women settled into an uneasy routine. Trenna woke before dawn each morning to feed the fire and make coffee. Alma helped with cooking, moving around the small kitchen with quiet competence. Dilly watched everything with wide eyes, asking questions about things Trenna had long taken for granted. How did the stove work? Where did the water come from? Why did the chickens lay eggs, even in winter? "You've never been outside New Eden?" Trenna asked her on the second day. Dilly shook her head. "I was born there. Father Gideon says the outside world is corrupt, full of sin and suffering. He says we're protected inside the community." "Protected," Alma said bitterly. "That's what he calls it." Trenna watched Dilly's face as she processed this contradiction. The girl had been raised to believe one thing, and now reality was showing her something different. That kind of awakening was painful. "Tell me about New Eden," Trenna said. "How's it set up?" Alma and Dilly exchanged glances. Then Alma began to speak, her voice steady but distant, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. "It's in a valley, surrounded by ridges on 3 sides. There's one road in and out, but Father Gideon keeps it gated and guarded. The main building is a hall where we have services and communal meals. There are dormitories for single women, cabins for families, a workshop, storage buildings, a generator shed. How many guards? 6 men on rotation. They patrol the perimeter, check the gate, make sure everyone's accounted for at night. Weapons? Rifles. Father Gideon doesn't allow anyone but his inner circle to carry them. He says it's for protection against outsiders, but really it's to keep us in." Trenna absorbed this. "And the people there, do they all believe? Or are some of them like you, looking for a way out?" "Some believe completely. They've been there so long they can't imagine anything else. Others, you can see it in their eyes. They know something's wrong, but they're too afraid to act. Father Gideon is very good at making you afraid." Dilly spoke up, her voice quiet. "He can make you believe things that aren't true. He talks about love and family, but then he punishes people for small mistakes. He says it's correction, that it's for our own good. After a while you start thinking maybe he's right, maybe you deserve it." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing faint scars on her forearm, small circular marks. "Cigarette burns," Alma said, her voice hard. "For talking back when she was 12. Trenna felt rage kindle in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. "He did that himself?" "No. He has others do it. Says it keeps his hands clean. But everyone knows the orders come from him. Tell me about him. What kind of man is he?" Alma stood and walked to the window, looking out at the endless white. "He's maybe 55, 56. Tall, good-looking in that weathered way, grey hair, blue eyes. When he talks, you want to believe him. He has this presence, like he's the only solid thing in a shifting world. That's how he pulls people in." "How'd you end up there?" Alma was quiet for a long moment. 15 years ago, I was in a bad place. I'd lost everything, my home, my job, She stopped. "I was living in my car. I met one of Gideon's recruiters at a shelter. She talked about community, purpose, belonging. Said they'd take care of me if I came with her. I was desperate enough to believe it. And once you got there, the first few months were good. Everyone was kind. The work was hard but meaningful. I felt like I'd found something real. But gradually things changed. Or maybe I just started seeing clearly. The rules got stricter. The punishments got harsher. By the time I realized what New Eden really was, I was trapped." "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Alma turned from the window. "Where would I go? I had nothing. No money, no connections, no way to survive out here. And Father Gideon made sure we knew what happened to women who tried to leave. He'd tell stories about them dying alone in the mountains, or falling back into drugs, or being attacked by men in the outside world. He made leaving seem like certain death, but you left anyway. Because of Dilly." Alma looked at the younger woman with something like fierce love. "I watched her grow up there. Watched Father Gideon start looking at her differently when she turned 20. He was planning to marry her off to one of his lieutenants, a man twice her age, who already had 2 wives. I couldn't let that happen." Dilly's hand went to her pocket, pulling out a string of wooden beads. Each bead was carved with a different symbol, crude crosses, stars, eyes. She held them loosely, like they might burn her. Father Gideon gave these to all the women, she said. Said they were prayer beads, that holding them would bring us closer to God. But really they were just another way to control us. We had to carry them everywhere, count them during prayers, kiss them when Father Gideon passed. If you lost them or forgot them, you were punished. She looked at the beads with disgust. I wanted to throw them away when we left, but Alma said to keep them. Evidence, she said. Trenna nodded. She's right. Everything you can remember, everything you can document it, all matters. She stood and went to the small bookshelf, pulling down a notebook and pencil. Write it down. Both of you. Everything you remember about New Eden. The layout, the people, the rules, the punishments. Dates, if you can remember them. Names. Alma took the notebook. You think someone will care? I don't know, but if they do, you'll need evidence. Your word against his isn't enough. You need details, corroboration, proof. Over the next hours, while the storm continued outside, Alma and Dilly filled pages with memories. Trenna watched them work, saw the way Alma's hand shook when she wrote certain things, saw the tears that slid down Dilly's face as she recalled specific incidents. She made them soup for lunch, kept the fire going, gave them space to remember and record. By evening, they'd filled 20 pages with small, cramped handwriting. There's more, Alma said. So much more. But my hand's cramping. That's enough for now. Rest. That night, Trenna began teaching them practical things, how to build a fire, how to read weather signs, how to move quietly in snow. She showed them where she kept her supplies, how to ration food, how to purify water from snow if needed. Why are you teaching us this? Dilly asked. Because you need to know how to survive. Out here, knowledge keeps you alive. But we're staying here, aren't we? Until it's safe? Trenna met her eyes. Plans change. Weather changes. People change. You need to be ready for anything. She saw understanding dawn on Alma's face. Trenna wasn't just teaching them survival skills. She was teaching them to survive without her, in case things went wrong. Later, after the women had gone to sleep, Trenna went outside to check the perimeter. The storm had finally started to ease. She could see stars between the clouds, which meant by tomorrow the weather would clear. She made her way to the tree line, moving through waist-deep snow. The tracks she'd found earlier were completely buried now, but she knew they'd been there. And when the storm cleared, there would be more. She was setting up a simple warning system, strings tied between trees at ankle height, with small bells attached when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the forest. An engine, distant but distinct. She froze, listening. There it was again. A snowmobile, maybe half a mile away, then a second one, from a different direction. They were out there in the storm, searching in weather that should have kept everyone indoors. That meant they were desperate, or dedicated, or both. Trenna finished setting her warning line, then made her way back to the cabin. She checked the bolt on the door, checked the windows, checked the rifle she kept hidden above the doorframe. Then she sat in her chair and waited for dawn, listening to the distant sound of engines circling like wolves. The storm broke on the third morning. Trenna woke to silence, the kind of deep, absolute quiet that only comes after heavy snow. She stood and looked out the window. The world was transformed. Drifts covered everything, smooth and pristine, glittering in the early sun. It was beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. She made coffee and started breakfast. Alma and Dilly woke to the smell of frying bacon, a luxury Trenna had been saving. After 3 days of tension, they needed something that felt like celebration. The storm's over, Dilly said, looking out the window with wonder. Means we're still snowed in, Trenna said. But I can start clearing paths. And, she hesitated, other people can move too. Alma understood immediately. They'll come. Maybe. Depends on how determined they are. They ate in silence, the mood subdued despite the bacon. After breakfast, Trenna geared up to go outside, snowshoes, heavy coat, hat pulled low. She took her walking stick and a shovel. "I'm going to check the property, clear a path to the barn. Stay inside, keep the door bolted. If you hear anything strange, anything at all, you hide in the loft and stay quiet until I come back." "Understood?" Both women nodded. Outside, the work was brutal. 3 feet of new snow on top of what was already there. Trenna shoveled a path from the cabin to the barn, checking on the chickens. They were fine, huddled together for warmth, but alive. She gave them extra feed and fresh water, then continued her circuit of the property. The warning bells she'd set up were buried under snow, but she reset them, adding a few more in strategic locations. Then she checked for tracks. She found them everywhere. Multiple sets, crisscrossing through the trees. They'd circled her property during the storm, staying just out of sight. Looking for signs of the women, maybe, or just marking territory, letting her know they were out there. Trenna followed one set of tracks to the edge of her land. They led to a spot where someone had stood for a while, just watching the cabin. She could see where they'd shifted their weight, where they'd turned to look in different directions. On a tree near where they'd stood, she found something that made her blood run cold. A piece of paper, wrapped in plastic and tied to a branch. She pulled it down and unfolded it. The message was simple, written in neat block letters. Asterisk, return what belongs to God. Asterisk. She pocketed the note and headed back to the cabin. Inside, she found Alma and Dilly, sitting at the table, the radio on low. They looked up when she entered, questions in their eyes. "They were here," she said. "During the storm. They left a message." She showed them the note. Alma's face went pale. "That's how Father Gideon talks. Everything belongs to God, and he speaks for God, so everything belongs to him. They know you're here," Trenna said. "They're just waiting for the right moment." Dilly's voice was small. "What do we do?" Trenna sat down at the table. "We prepare, and we decide what happens when they come. When, not if," Alma said. "When." They spent the afternoon planning. Alma drew a detailed map of New Eden from memory, marking guard posts, buildings, weak points in the perimeter. Trenna studied it, asking questions, memorizing details. She had no intention of going there, but information was power. Dilly added notes about schedules, when guards changed shifts, when meals were served, when people gathered for services. The rhythms of the community, the patterns that kept it running. "Father Gideon leads services every evening at sunset," she said. "Everyone has to attend. That's when the compound is most vulnerable, because all the guards are in the main hall too." "Except the gate guard," Alma corrected. "He stays posted no matter what." Trenna filed this information away. She still didn't have a clear plan, but knowing the enemy's routines was essential. The radio crackled in the background, playing country music and occasional news updates. Most of it was about the storm road closures, power outages, towns cut off. Then something caught Trenna's attention. "Authorities are asking for help locating 2 women missing from a religious community in the northern mountains. Alma Jean, 47, and Delia Morrison, 24, were last seen 3 days ago. The community's leader, Gideon Thorne, says the women may be disoriented or in medical distress. Anyone with information is asked to contact." Trenna turned the radio off. "Delia," she said, looking at Dilly. "That your real name?" The young woman nodded. "Everyone at New Eden called me Dilly. I'd almost forgotten, Delia." "Well, Delia Morrison, you're officially a missing person. So is Alma." "What does that mean?" Dilly asked. "Means the law is looking for you. Means Father Gideon has positioned himself as the concerned leader, trying to help. Makes him look good. Makes you look unstable." "That's his game," Alma said bitterly. "He's always one step ahead. If we go to the authorities now, he'll say we're confused, maybe suffering from exposure. He'll have doctors ready to confirm we need help. By the time anyone figures out the truth, we'll be back at New Eden." Trenna stood and paced the small cabin. She'd seen this pattern before, too. Abusers who controlled the narrative, who used institutions and systems to further their control. It made her sick, but it didn't surprise her. "Then we don't go to the authorities," she said. "Not yet, not until we have something they can't ignore." "Like what?" "More witnesses, documentation, physical evidence of abuse, something that makes the case too strong to dismiss." "That could take months," Alma said. "Then it takes months. You're safe here." But even as she said it, Trenna wondered if it was true. The note on the tree suggested otherwise. That evening, they settled into a different kind of routine. Trenna showed them where she kept her emergency supplies, a bag packed with food, water, first aid, matches. She showed them the rifle above the door, taught them how to load and fire it. Neither woman wanted to touch it, but Trenna insisted, "You need to know. Just in case." "In case of what?" Dilly asked. "In case I'm not here. In case something happens and you need to protect yourselves." Alma held the rifle awkwardly, her hands shaking. "I've never fired a gun." "You don't have to, unless there's no other choice. But you need to know how." They practiced with an unloaded rifle until both women could handle it with basic competence. It wasn't much, but it was something. After dark, Trenna went outside one more time. She stood in the snow, looking north toward where New Eden lay hidden in the mountains. The air was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. Somewhere out there, men were planning their next move. She thought about the daughter she'd lost, the one who died because Trenna hadn't been smart enough or fast enough or careful enough. She'd promised herself she'd never let that happen again. She wouldn't. Whatever it took, she'd keep these two women safe. Even if it meant confronting demons she'd spent 20 years trying to forget. Days turned into a week. The snow settled, the temperature dropped further, and a fragile peace settled over the cabin. But it was the kind of peace that came before storms, not after them. Everyone felt it. Alma was the first to truly open up about her past. It happened one evening while they were preparing dinner, the cabin warm and close, the lamp casting soft shadows. "I had a son," she said suddenly, her knife pausing over the potato she was peeling. "Before New Eden. His name was Daniel." Trenna and Dilly both went still. Alma had never mentioned a child. "He was 3 when I met Gideon's recruiter. Beautiful boy, blonde hair, always laughing. His father had left us, and I was—" Her voice caught. "I was drowning. No job, no money, about to be evicted. When the recruiter said New Eden would take care of both of us, it seemed like salvation." She resumed peeling, her movements mechanical. "They let me keep him for the first month. Then Father Gideon said he'd be better off in the children's dormitory, that I was being selfish keeping him to myself. I resisted, but they wore me down. After a few weeks in the dormitory, Daniel started changing. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak. The other women said it was normal. The children adjusted to community life. But I knew something was wrong." Dilly reached across the table, touching Alma's hand. Alma squeezed back, but kept talking, like if she stopped, she'd never be able to start again. "One morning, about 4 months after we arrived, I went to the dormitory and Daniel was gone. Father Gideon called a meeting. He said Daniel had been adopted by a faithful family outside the community, that he'd have a better life, that I should be grateful. I tried to fight it, tried to demand answers, but they locked me in isolation for a week. When I came out, everyone acted like Daniel had never existed. They'd removed all pictures, all evidence. If I mentioned him, I was punished." Tears ran down her face now, but her voice stayed steady. "I never saw him again. I don't know if he's alive or dead, if he was really adopted or if something worse happened. That not knowing, it's destroyed me. Every day for 15 years, I've wondered." Trenna set down her own knife. "How old would he be now?" 18, a man grown, if he's still alive. "And you never tried to find out? How?" I had no freedom, no contact with the outside world, and part of me was too afraid of what I'd learn. She wiped her eyes. That's why I couldn't let them keep Dilly. When I saw Father Gideon looking at her the same way he'd looked at Daniel, like she was property to be used, I knew we had to run. Dilly was crying now too. You saved me. Whatever happens, you saved me. Later that night, Alma showed them the journal she'd been keeping. Leather-bound, worn at the edges, with pages torn out in places where she'd ripped out entries that were too dangerous to keep. I started this 5 years ago, she said. Father Gideon forbids writing anything down, says it shows a lack of faith that we should trust in his memory of events. But I couldn't let it all disappear. Couldn't let him erase what was happening. She opened the journal to a random page and read aloud. Asterisk March 14. Sharon was punished today for speaking during mealtime. 3 hours in the cold shed. She has pneumonia now. Father Gideon says it's God's judgment. Asterisk. Another page. Asterisk July 2. Father Gideon announced his engagement to Rachel. She's 16. She cried during the ceremony. He said those were tears of joy. Asterisk. Another. Asterisk. October 8. Found Susan behind the laundry building, her wrists bandaged. She wouldn't say what happened. But I know. We all know. Father Gideon says suicide is the ultimate sin, but what about the sins that make people want to die? Asterisk, page after page of quiet horror, documented in careful handwriting. Trenna photographed each page with an old digital camera she kept for documenting her property. Evidence, she thought, building a case. But would it be enough? The next day, Dilly asked if she could learn to read properly. I know letters and some words, she said, but Father Gideon only let us read scripture, and even then he told us what it meant. I want to read other things. Real things. Trenna pulled books from her shelves, simple ones at first, then gradually more complex. They sat together each afternoon, Dilly sounding out words, Trenna patiently correcting. Alma joined in sometimes, helping, encouraging. Watching Dilly discover stories beyond the narrow world of New Eden was like watching someone wake up. She asked endless questions. Why did the characters make those choices? What happened before the story started? Were these things real? Some are real, some are made up, Trenna explained. But even the made-up ones tell true things about people. Father Gideon said stories were lies, Dilly said. He said the only truth was in scripture and in his teachings. Father Gideon was wrong about a lot of things. One afternoon, while helping organize Trenna's small supply closet, Dilly found an old photograph tucked into a book. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes. She was standing in front of a patrol car, wearing an oversized sheriff's hat and grinning at the camera. "Who's this?" Dilly asked, holding up the photo. Trenna's face went carefully blank. "Someone from a long time ago. She looks happy." She was. In that moment, Dilly sensed she'd touched something painful and quickly put the photo back. But Alma had seen Trenna's reaction, had seen the grief that flashed across her face. That night, after Dilly was asleep, Alma approached Trenna at the table. "You lost someone too," she said quietly, "didn't you?" Trenna was silent for a long moment. Then she retrieved the photograph from the closet and set it on the table between them. "Her name was Jessie. She was my daughter." "Was?" "She died 23 years ago. She was 8. Alma waited, not pushing, just present. "I was a county sheriff," Trenna said. "First woman sheriff in my county. I was proud of that, thought I was making a difference. I'd built a career on protecting people, especially women and children in bad situations." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Turns out I couldn't protect my own. What happened? I'd left my husband 2 years before. He was abusive, started with words, then escalated to violence. I knew the pattern, knew the statistics, knew what I had to do. I took Jessie and left. Got a restraining order, did everything by the book. We stayed in a women's shelter for a while, then moved to a new town where I got the sheriff position. I thought we were safe. She fell silent, her jaw tight. He found us, Alma said softly. He found us. Came to my office one afternoon when Jesse was there because school had let out early. He had a gun. I had a gun. We both drew. He fired first. She paused. Jesse was standing behind me. The bullet went through my shoulder and hit her in the chest. She died before the ambulance arrived. Oh, God, Alma whispered. I killed him after. One shot, center mass, clean kill. They called it justified. Self-defense and defense of others. I was exonerated. But it didn't matter. Jesse was still dead. And it was my fault for not being more careful, for not seeing him coming, for... Her voice broke. For being human, Alma finished gently. For not being able to see the future or read minds or be perfect. I was a sheriff. I should have known. You were a mother. And sometimes bad things happen no matter what we do. Trenna looked at the photograph of her daughter, that bright smile frozen in time. I came here to get away from everything that reminded me of her. But you can't outrun grief. It finds you anyway. Is that why you're helping us? Because of her? Maybe. I don't know. I just know I can't watch someone else die because I didn't do enough. Alma reached across the table and took Trenna's hand. Two women who'd lost children. Two women carrying unbearable weight. In that moment, something shifted between them, not quite healing but understanding, a recognition that some pains don't go away. You just learn to carry them differently. Outside, the wind picked up. Something rattled against the side of the cabin, a branch, or maybe something else. Both women looked toward the window, the moment of connection broken by renewed awareness of the threat surrounding them. Trenna stood and checked the locks, checked the rifle. Then she returned to her chair and kept watch, the way she did every night now. Alma sat with her for a while, before finally going to bed. The photograph of Jesse stayed on the table, that bright smile watching over them through the long, dark hours. The discovery came 3 days later, in the middle of the night. Trenna jerked awake to the sound of bells, the warning system she'd set up at the tree line. Someone had triggered the strings. She was on her feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window. In the moonlight reflecting off the snow, she could see two figures at the edge of the property. Not approaching, just standing there, watching. She woke Alma and Dilly quietly. Someone's here. Get dressed. Grab your boots. If I tell you to run, you take the emergency pack and head south toward the creek. Follow it downstream until you reach the old logging road. Turn east. There's a ranger station about 10 miles out. You understand? Both women nodded, fear bright in their eyes. Trenna positioned herself by the window, rifle ready but not pointed. She watched the figures. They made no move to approach, just stood there, dark shapes against the white snow. After 20 minutes, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. In the morning, Trenna found what they'd left behind. A piece of paper, weighted down with a rock, placed on her woodpile where she'd be sure to find it. Another message, same neat handwriting, * you harbor. Sinners, return them and be forgiven, keep them and share their judgment. * underneath, a phone number. She brought it inside and showed the women. Alma's hands shook as she read it. That's Father Gideon's number, the one he gives to potential recruits. He wants you to call him. What would he say? He'd sound reasonable. Concerned. He'd explain that we're confused, maybe suffering from exposure or psychological distress. He'd offer to take us back, get us help. He'd make it sound like mercy. And if I refused, then the threats would start. Maybe not right away, but they'd come. He'd find ways to make your life difficult, make you regret helping us. Trenna crumpled the note and threw it in the stove. He can try. But the visits continued. Every few nights, someone would come close enough to trigger the bells, then retreat. Never approaching, never speaking. just reminding them they were being watched. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. Dilly jumped at every sound. Alma barely slept. Even Trenna found herself constantly on edge, checking the windows, the doors, the tree line. On the fourth night, they found something new. Footprints that came all the way up to the cabin, circling it completely. Someone had walked the perimeter while they slept, checking windows, testing doors. And on the porch, arranged in a neat line, 3 wooden prayer beads, identical to the ones Dilly had brought. "He knows exactly where we are," Alma said, staring at the beads. "And he's telling us he can get to us whenever he wants." Trenna scooped up the beads and threw them into the woods. Then she made a decision. "I need to go into town, get supplies, make a phone call. I'll be gone most of the day." "Don't leave us," Dilly said, panic rising in her voice. "You'll be fine. I'm going to show you something before I go." She led them to the loft and pulled aside a loose board in the floor. Underneath was a small space, big enough for one person to hide. She'd built it years ago, a remnant of paranoia from her first months in the mountains. "If anyone comes while I'm gone, you hide here. One of you in this space, the other in the root cellar outside. Don't come out until you hear my voice, no matter what. Understood?" They practiced the hiding routine until both women could disappear in less than 30 seconds. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Trenna set out before dawn, snowshoes strapped on, her walking stick in hand. The trek to Calvert's store took 3 hours through heavy snow. By the time she arrived, her legs were shaking with exhaustion. Tom Calvert looked up in surprise when she walked in. "Trenna, been wondering if you'd made it through the storm." "I'm fine. Need to make a purchase and use your phone." "Sure thing." She bought basic supplies, flour, coffee, beans, then asked to use the phone in Tom's office. He nodded, discreet as always, and left her alone. She pulled out a piece of paper where she'd written a name and number. Sheriff Raymond Cole. She'd worked with him 15 years ago, before she left law enforcement. He'd been a deputy then, earnest and honest. She'd heard he'd made sheriff of the neighboring county. She hoped he was still the same man. The phone rang 4 times before he answered. "Cole, Ray, it's Trenna Vale." A long pause. "Trenna? Jesus, I thought you were, where are you?" "Montana." "Listen, I don't have much time. I need information on a man named Gideon Thorne. He runs a place called New Eden, religious community in the northern mountains." "New Eden." "Yeah, I know it. Had a couple calls about it over the years. Nothing ever came of them." "Tell me." "Let's see. First call was maybe 8 years ago. Woman claimed she'd been held against her will, that they'd taken her son. We investigated, but she recanted. Said she'd been confused, that everything was fine. Second call was 3 years ago. Anonymous tip about suspicious activity. We sent someone out, but Thorne was cooperative, showed us around. Everything looked legitimate. Community was self-sufficient. Everyone we talked to seemed happy. We couldn't justify further investigation." "What about Thorne himself? Any background?" "Clean record." "Well, mostly. Had a few charges back in the 90s, fraud, coercion, but nothing stuck. Smart guy. Knows the law. Knows how to work it. He's got 2 women here who escaped. They're telling me about systematic abuse, forced marriages, psychological torture. One of them kept a journal." Ray was quiet for a moment. "You sure about this, Trenna?" "I'm sure. These women, they willing to testify?" "They're terrified, and with good reason. Thorne's got people watching my place. I don't know how long I can keep them safe." "Where are you exactly?" She gave him general directions, nothing too specific. Old habits from her law enforcement days never reveal everything. "I can't do an official investigation without cause," Ray said, "but I can ask around, see if anyone else has had concerns, and if you need backup, I'll call you. But Ray, be careful. Thorne's got connections. Don't trust anything at face value." "I won't." And Trenna, it's good to hear your voice. I've thought about you over the years, wondered if you'd found any peace up there. Working on it. She hung up and stood for a moment, collecting herself. She'd made contact with law enforcement, established a lifeline. It wasn't much, but it was progress. On the way back, she took a different route, one that brought her close to the northern ridge where New Eden was supposed to be. She couldn't see anything. The valley would be hidden from this angle, but she could feel it. A wrongness in the air, a sense of something dark nestled in these mountains. She thought about Alma's son, taken at age 3, about Dilly, born into captivity, about all the other women still there, trapped by fear and manipulation. One way or another, this had to end. She made it back to the cabin just before dark. Alma and Dilly had barricaded the door and had the rifle loaded and ready. They nearly shot her before they recognized her voice. "Everything okay here?" Trenna asked once they'd let her in. "Someone came by around noon," Alma said. "Walked around the cabin twice. We hid, like you said. He didn't try to come in, just knocked once and left." Trenna checked outside and found another note, this one more direct. Asterisk, time is running out. Return them or face consequences. Asterisk, she showed it to the women. "They're getting impatient, that's good." "How is that good?" Dilly asked. "Impatient people make mistakes. We just have to be ready when they do." That night, they sat around the table and made a final inventory of their resources. Food for another 3 weeks if they rationed, ammunition for the rifle, firewood for a month, maybe more, the emergency pack, packed and ready, and 3 women who'd all lost something, irreplaceable, bound together now by necessity and something deeper. Not quite family, but not quite strangers either. Something new, forged in shared fear and tentative trust. Trenna looked at them, Alma with her scarred hands and fierce eyes, Dilly with her growing strength and endless questions, and felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Responsibility. Not the kind that came with a badge, but the kind that came from caring what happened to people, from choosing to stand between them and harm, whatever the cost. She'd failed once, catastrophically, but she wouldn't fail again. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin like wolves circling prey, and somewhere in the darkness she knew men were planning their next move. Let them come, she thought. Let them try. The box was hidden in the back of Trenna's closet, beneath a loose floorboard she'd installed specifically for this purpose. She'd avoided looking at it for 20 years, but now she pulled it out and set it on the table. Alma and Dilly watched as she opened it. Inside, a sheriff's badge, tarnished but still recognizable. A service weapon, cleaned and maintained despite years of disuse. A stack of case files bound with rubber bands, newspaper clippings, photographs. "You were law enforcement," Alma said quietly. "County sheriff. For 6 years." Trenna picked up the badge, felt its familiar weight. "I worked domestic violence cases mostly. Restraining orders, protective custody, safe house placement. I knew the patterns, knew the tactics abusers used. I thought I was making a difference." She set the badge down and picked up one of the photographs. A crime scene photo, stark and clinical. This was the Matthews case. Husband had been beating his wife for years. She finally got the courage to leave, filed for divorce, got a restraining order. "I personally served it, told him if he came near her or the kids, he'd go to jail." "What happened?" Dilly asked. "He killed her. 3 weeks later, shot her in the grocery store parking lot, broad daylight, then turned the gun on himself. The kids watched from the car." She put the photo away. "That's when I started to understand that sometimes doing everything right isn't enough. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes evil wins." She pulled out another file. The Chen case. Woman and her 2 daughters fled an abusive situation. I got them placed in a shelter 3 counties over, new identities, the whole protocol. 6 months later, he found them. Killed all 3 and disappeared. We never caught him. Case after case, she laid them out. Women she'd tried to help, women she'd failed. The weight of those failures had accumulated over the years, each one a stone in a growing burden she'd carried alone. And then there was Jessie, she said. My daughter. The one case I should have been able to solve. The one person I should have been able to protect. I failed her too. Alma reached across the table, but Trenna pulled back. After Jessie died, I couldn't do the work anymore. I couldn't face the women who came in with bruises and fear in their eyes, knowing I couldn't guarantee their safety. Couldn't promise them anything except that I'd try, and trying wasn't enough. So I left. Turned in my badge, sold everything I owned, and came here. Built this cabin with my own hands and told myself I was done with all of it. She stood and paced the small space, agitated. But I kept the files, kept the badge, kept the gun. I told myself it was just practical, everyone needs protection this far out. But really, I think I kept them because I couldn't let go completely. Couldn't accept that I'd failed. You didn't fail, Dilly said. You tried to help those women. Trying isn't enough. They're still dead. Some of them lived though, didn't they? Alma asked. You said these were the cases that went wrong. But what about the ones that went right? How many women are alive because of you? Trenna stopped pacing. She'd never thought about it that way. Had only focused on the losses, never the wins. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe dozens, maybe hundreds. You can't count the disasters you prevented because they never happened. But they're real, Trenna. Those women and children who got away, who stayed safe because you helped them, they're just as real as the ones who didn't make it. Trenna sat down heavily. 20 years of guilt, and she'd never once considered the other side of the equation. Why are you showing us this now? Alma asked. Because you need to know who you're staying with, what I'm capable of, and what I'm not. She picked up the badge again. I know how to handle dangerous situations. I know tactics, surveillance, threat assessment. I know how to build a case that'll hold up in court. But I also know how badly things can go wrong, even when you do everything right. She looked at both women. Father Gideon, I made some calls today. He's got a history. Real name is Gideon Thorne, and he's been investigated before. Fraud charges in 1992 dropped due to insufficient evidence. Suspected of running a pyramid scheme in 1995, but nothing stuck. A missing person case in 1998. A woman from one of his early communities disappeared, but he had alibis and witnesses saying she'd left voluntarily. He's done this before, Alma said. New Eden isn't his first. No. He's been running similar operations for 30 years. Different states, different names for the communities, but same pattern. He recruits vulnerable people, promises them salvation or purpose, then slowly takes control. The smart ones leave early, the desperate ones stay. And some, she gestured to the case files, some disappear. Dilly's face had gone pale. How many? At least 4 women I could find records of. Could be more. He's careful, moves around, keeps things just legal enough that investigations go nowhere. He knows how to manipulate the system. So, going to the police won't help, Alma said. Not without something they can't ignore. That's why your journal is important. That's why we need documentation, witness testimony, physical evidence. We need to build a case so strong that even Thorne's lawyers can't make it disappear. She spread out the contents of the box badge, files, newspaper clippings. I ran from this life 20 years ago, but maybe I was wrong to run. Maybe I should have stayed and fought harder. You were grieving, Alma said gently. You did what you needed to survive. Maybe. But now I have a choice. I can keep hiding, or I can use what I know to help you, to help the other women still trapped at New Eden, to make sure Thorne finally faces consequences. She looked at them both. But you need to understand what that means. If we do this, if we really go after him, it's going to get dangerous. He's not going to give up. He's got resources, people loyal to him, connections we don't fully understand. Coming for you is one thing, but if he knows I'm actively working against him, that I have law enforcement experience, and I'm building a case, he'll come for all of us." Alma finished. "Yes." "Good," Alma said, her voice hard. "Let him come. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being afraid. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's make sure he never hurts anyone again." Dilly nodded, her young face set with determination. "I want to help too, whatever you need." Trenna felt something shift inside her. These women, broken and scared but still fighting, they reminded her why she'd become a sheriff in the first place. To protect people who couldn't protect themselves. To stand between the innocent and those who'd harmed them. She'd lost sight of that purpose in her grief. But maybe it wasn't too late to find it again. "Okay," she said. "Then, here's what we do." She pulled out a notebook and began to sketch out a plan. First, they'd document everything Alma would. Finish her written testimony, Dilly would do the same. They'd photograph the journal, make copies of everything. Second, Trenna would reach out to her old contacts, carefully, building a network of support. Third, they'd try to find other women who'd escaped New Eden or similar communities. Corroborating witnesses would strengthen the case. "And we prepare for the worst," she said. "Thorne's going to escalate. He'll come here eventually, probably with enough men to overwhelm us. We need to be ready." She pulled out maps of the area, marked escape routes, safe points, places they could hide or make a stand if necessary. She showed them how to use the radio to call for help, gave them Sheriff Cole's number, made sure they memorized it. They worked late into the night, planning and preparing. When they finally stopped, exhausted, the table was covered with papers, maps, notes, testimonies, strategies. Trenna looked at it all and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not quite. Hope, but possibility. The sense that maybe this time things could end differently. She picked up her badge and turned it over in her hands. The metal caught the lamplight, throwing small reflections on the walls. "For Jesse," she said quietly, "and for Daniel, and for every woman Thorne's hurt, we end this." Alma and Dilly nodded. Outside, the night was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that came before something broke. Trenna set the badge on the table where she could see it. A reminder of who she'd been, who she'd failed to be, and who she might still become. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The call came 2 days later, in the early morning when frost still clung to the windows. Trenna was outside splitting wood when she heard the radio crackling from inside the cabin. She dropped the axe and ran. Sheriff Raymond Cole's voice came through the static. "Trenna, you there? Pick up if you can hear me." She grabbed the handset. "I'm here. What have you got?" "Been asking around about New Eden like you requested. Found something interesting. Woman named Patricia Lowell, lives over in Whitefish now. She was at New Eden 6 years ago, got out with her daughter. Took her 3 years to feel safe enough to talk about it. She'll meet with you if you want." Trenna's pulse quickened. "When?" "This afternoon, if you can make it. She's nervous about coming forward again, but when I mentioned you had others who'd escaped, she said she'd talk. Might have information that helps your case." "Where?" He gave her an address in Whitefish, about 40 miles south. A 3-hour drive in good conditions, longer with the snow. "I'll be there," she said. "Ray, thanks. Be careful, Trenna. I've been hearing things. Thorne's got friends in places you wouldn't expect. County clerk's office, district attorney's staff. People who owe him favors or believe his story. This isn't going to be as clean as we'd like. Nothing ever is." After she signed off, she found Alma and Dilly waiting at the table, their faces anxious. "What is it?" Alma asked. "Someone who got out. She's willing to talk." Trenna checked her watch. "I need to leave within the hour to make it on time. You two will be alone most of the day." "We'll be fine," Alma said, but her voice was tight. "Review the emergency procedures. If anyone comes, we know. Hide and don't come out until we hear your voice." Trenna gathered supplies for the trip, the digital camera, a notebook, copies of Alma's journal entries. She strapped on her service weapon, hidden under her coat. Old instincts coming back, muscle memory from a life she'd tried to leave behind. Before she left, she showed them one more thing. From the bottom of her supply box, she pulled out a satellite phone, old but functional. "This is for absolute emergencies only. It's registered to my old department, so using it will create a trail. But if something happens to me, if you need help and can't reach anyone else, you turn it on and dial 911. Understand?" Dilly took the phone with trembling hands. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "Probably not. But we prepare for everything." The drive to Whitefish was treacherous. The county road had been ploughed, but ice lurked beneath thin layers of snow. Trenna drove carefully, her truck grinding through drifts, chains clanking on the tires. She kept checking her mirrors, watching for anyone following. The road behind her stayed empty. Patricia Lowell lived in a modest house on the edge of town, a tidy place with a snowman in the front yard that looked like a child had built it. Trenna knocked, and a woman in her mid-40s answered, thin, with short grey hair and eyes that assessed Trenna carefully before softening. "You must be Trenna. Ray said you'd come. Come in, please." Inside, the house was warm and lived in. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator. A teenage girl sat on the couch, reading a book. She looked up when Trenna entered, and Trenna saw the same wariness in her eyes that she'd seen in Dilly. "My daughter, Emma," Patricia said. "She was 12 when we left New Eden. She's 18 now." "I remember," Emma said quietly. "All of it." They sat at the kitchen table, and Patricia made coffee with shaking hands. "I never thought I'd talk about this again. After we escaped, I just wanted to forget. But Ray said, there are others now, that you're trying to build a case. 2 women. They're safe, but Thorne's people are searching for them. I need to know what you experienced, what you saw. Anything that might help establish a pattern." Patricia nodded and began to speak. Her story was heartbreakingly familiar. Recruited at a vulnerable moment, initially treated well, then slowly trapped as the rules tightened and the punishments escalated. Forced labor, arranged marriages, children taken from their mothers for communal raising. The worst part was how he twisted religion to justify everything, Patricia said. He'd quote scripture, make it sound like abuse was love, like control was protection. After a while, you started believing him. You had to, or you'd go insane. How did you get out? One of the guards had a conscience. His name was Marcus, older man, maybe 60. He'd been there since the beginning, but I think he'd started seeing things clearly. He helped us one night when he was on perimeter duty. Left the gate unlocked, looked the other way. We walked out and didn't stop for 3 days. Did they come after you? Oh, yes. They found us in a motel in Kalispell. Father Gideon himself came with 4 of his men. He was so calm, so reasonable, told the motel manager that we were his wife and daughter, that I was mentally ill and had taken Emma. The manager believed him, why wouldn't he? Father Gideon is very convincing. How'd you get away? Emma spoke up. There was a woman in the next room. She heard everything through the wall, heard my mum crying, heard me, begging him not to take us back. She called the police. When they showed up, Father Gideon's whole demeanor changed. He became the concerned community leader, said he just wanted to help us get treatment. But the police separated us, interviewed us individually. I told them everything. And they investigated, Patricia said bitterly. Went to New Eden, talked to people there. Everyone said we were confused, that we'd left voluntarily but were having trouble adjusting to the outside world. Father Gideon showed them around. Everything looked fine. The investigation went nowhere. But you didn't go back. No, we had family in Washington. We ran there, changed our names, started over. It took years before I stopped looking over my shoulder. Trenna photographed the notes she'd taken, asked more detailed questions about the compound's layout, the people in positions of power, the daily routines. Patricia drew a map from memory that matched Dilly's almost exactly. "There's one more thing," Patricia said. "Father Gideon, his real first name isn't Gideon. That's something he chose later for the religious image. His birth name is Michael Thorne. I found that out after we left, when I was trying to learn everything I could about him. Michael Thorne," Trenna repeated, committing it to memory. Another piece of the puzzle. As she was preparing to leave, Emma stopped her. "The two women you're protecting, are they young?" "One is early 20s. Emma's face darkened. Tell her it gets better. It takes time, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it will, but it does. Tell her she's not broken, no matter what he made her believe." Trenna squeezed the girl's shoulder. "I will." On the drive back, Trenna's mind raced. Two families now, with similar stories, a pattern of abuse, control, manipulation. If she could find more witnesses, build more documentation, eventually the case would become impossible to ignore. But they needed time, and time was the one thing they didn't have. She was 20 miles from home when she saw the smoke. A dark column rising from the direction of her cabin, visible against the afternoon sky. Her heart lurched. She pressed the accelerator, the truck fishtailing on ice, her mind running through worst-case scenarios. Please let them be okay, she thought. Please. The last few miles took forever. When she finally reached her property, she saw the source of the smoke, not her cabin, but the barn. It was burning, flames licking at the wooden walls, black smoke pouring into the sky. She jumped from the truck and ran toward the cabin. The door was intact, still locked from the inside. She pounded on it. "Alma, Dilly, it's me." A long, terrible moment of silence. Then the bolt slid back and the door opened. Both women stood there, soot-streaked and wide-eyed but alive. "What happened?" "They came," Alma said. "4 of them, maybe an hour after you left. They called out, said they just wanted to talk. We hid like you said. When we didn't answer, She gestured toward the burning barn. Trenna looked at the flames. The structure was lost, but that didn't matter. The women were safe. Everything else could be rebuilt. "They left another message," Dilly said, holding out a piece of paper. Trenna read it. Asterisk, last warning. Sunrise tomorrow. Return them or we come in. Asterisk. She crumpled the paper. Tomorrow. They had until tomorrow. "We need to leave," Alma said. "Run, get as far away as we can." "No," Trenna's voice was firm. "Running just delays the inevitable. He'll find you eventually. He always does. We know that now." "Then what do we do?" Trenna looked at the burning barn, at the message in her hand, at the 2 women who'd put their trust in her. She thought about Jessie, about all the women in her old case files, about Patricia and Emma who'd spent 6 years looking over their shoulders. She thought about Sheriff Cole's offer of backup, about the evidence they'd gathered, about the satellite phone hidden in the cabin, and she made a decision. We end this. Tonight. On our terms, not his. She gathered them at the table and laid out her plan. It was risky, possibly insane, but it was their only real chance. They'd use the weapons they had: knowledge, preparation, and the element of surprise. Ray Cole will be here by midnight with backup. I'll call him now, tell him we need help immediately. While we wait, we prepare. Set up defensive positions, gather evidence, document everything. When Thorne comes at sunrise, we'll be ready. And this time, we'll have law enforcement present to witness whatever he does. Will that be enough? Dilly asked. It has to be. They spent the evening in controlled chaos. Trenna called Ray, who promised to bring 3 deputies and be there by midnight. She positioned the evidence: journals, photographs, testimonies in strategic locations where it couldn't be destroyed easily. She showed the women how to barricade. Themselves in the loft if needed, gave them the rifle and extra ammunition. As darkness fell, they ate a cold meal, too tense to cook. Outside, the barn had burned down to smoking ruins. The smell of charred wood drifted through the air, a reminder of how close danger had come. Alma sat by the window, keeping watch. "I've been thinking about Daniel," she said quietly. "My son. If he's still alive, he'd be 18 now, Emma's age. I wonder if he remembers me, if Father Gideon told him lies about why I gave him up." "When this is over," Trenna said, "we'll find out what happened to him. I promise." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise we'll try." At 11:30, headlights appeared on the road. Trenna tensed, then relaxed when she recognized the sheriff's vehicle. Ray Cole emerged, followed by 3 deputies. All 4 were armed and serious-faced. Ray embraced Trenna briefly. "Hell of a situation you've gotten yourself into." "Story of my life." They gathered inside, and Trenna briefed them on everything: New Eden, Gideon, Thorn, the threats, the evidence. Ray studied the maps and journals, his expression growing darker. "This is enough to start an investigation," he said. "Maybe even get a warrant. But Thorn's smart. He'll lawyer up immediately, and without victims willing to testify in court." "We'll testify," Alma said firmly. "Both of us, whatever it takes." Ray nodded. "Okay then, we'll be here when he shows up. Document everything he says and does. If he threatens you, if he tries to take you by force, we'll arrest him. At minimum, we can charge him with arson for the barn, maybe harassment, trespassing. It's a start." They positioned themselves strategically, 2 deputies outside with clear sightlines, Ray and 1 deputy inside with the women. Trenna checked her service weapon one more time, the weight of it familiar in her hand. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2. The mountain was silent except for the wind and the occasional crackle of the radio. At 4:30, as the sky was just beginning to lighten, they heard engines. Multiple vehicles, approaching from the north. "Here we go," Ray said quietly. Trenna stood beside Alma and Dilly, one hand resting on each woman's shoulder. "Stay calm. Stay together. We've got this." The vehicles came into view, 3 trucks and a van, just like before. They parked in a line across Trenna's property, headlights blazing. Doors opened and men emerged. Trenna counted 8, all wearing heavy coats, all with hard faces. And from the lead truck, a tall figure stepped out. Even from a distance, Trenna could feel his presence, commanding, charismatic, dangerous. Father Gideon had come personally to reclaim what he believed was his. The final confrontation was about to begin. Father Gideon walked toward the cabin with the confidence of a man who'd never lost. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-grey hair and a face that might have been kind if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore a long coat over simple clothes, and his boots crunched in the snow with measured, unhurried steps. His men fanned out behind him, positioning themselves strategically. Trenna recognized the tactics: surround, intimidate, overwhelm. She'd seen it before in hostage situations, in standoffs with armed suspects. The goal was to make resistance seem futile. But Gideon didn't know about the deputies outside, hidden in positions they'd taken hours before. He didn't know about Sheriff Cole inside the cabin, camera ready to document everything. He thought he was dealing with one woman alone, protecting 2 escapees. He was wrong. Gideon stopped about 20 feet from the cabin and raised his voice. It was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that carried authority whether you wanted it to or not. "Good morning. My name is Gideon Thorn. I believe you have 2 members of my community with you, Alma Jean and Delia Morrison. I've come to bring them home." Trenna opened the door but stayed on the threshold, rifle visible but not pointed at anyone. "They are home, and they're staying here." Gideon's smile was patient, almost pitying. "I understand you've been misled. Alma and Delia are ill, suffering from delusions brought on by stress and exposure. They need medical help, spiritual counseling. I'm here to provide that. They seem pretty clear-headed to me." With respect, you're not qualified to make that assessment. I've brought a doctor with me. He gestured to one of the men behind him. He can examine them, verify their condition. Surely you want what's best for them? It was smoothly done, Trenna had to admit. He sounded reasonable, concerned, like any responsible leader would. Someone listening without context might believe him. Let me make this simple, Trenna said. Alma and Dilly are adults. They've chosen to be here. They've told me about New Eden, about the conditions there, about the abuse. They're not going back. Something flickered in Gideon's eyes, anger quickly controlled. Abuse? That's a serious accusation. What exactly have they claimed? Forced labor, arranged marriages, physical punishment, psychological control. Shall I continue? Those are lies. His voice hardened slightly. Alma has a history of mental instability. She's made false accusations before, and Delia, poor girl, was born into confusion, never learned to think for herself. They need structure, guidance, not encouragement of their delusions. Interesting how everyone who leaves your community suddenly develops mental problems. Gideon's jaw tightened. I don't know who you are or what authority you think you have, but you're interfering in a private matter. Those women are part of my congregation. They made commitments, signed documents. Legally, they have obligations. No contract is valid if signed under duress, and last I checked, kidnapping and false imprisonment are crimes. Bold words from someone. Harboring runaways. I could have you charged with interference, maybe even kidnapping yourself. I have lawyers who... I'm sure you do. Trenna stepped fully outside, letting him see the badge clipped to her belt. She'd put it on an hour ago, a calculated move. I'm also a former county sheriff with law enforcement contacts. You want to talk about lawyers? Let's talk about the investigation that's about to open into New Eden. Multiple witnesses, documented abuse, evidence of "you have nothing," Gideon interrupted, but his composure was cracking. Lies from disturbed women. That's all. We'll see what a jury thinks. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Trenna could see him reassessing, calculating. He'd expected intimidation to work, expected her to fold when faced with his authority and numbers. But she was standing firm, and he didn't like it. His voice dropped, became almost conversational. You don't understand what you're interfering with. New Eden is more than a community. It's a sanctuary for lost souls, people who have nowhere else to go. Everything I've built there, I've built to help people. Yes, we have rules. Yes, we have discipline. But it's for their own good, to keep them safe from a corrupt world that would destroy them. By beating them? By forcing women to marry men they don't love? By taking children from their mothers? Sometimes love requires firmness. Sometimes salvation requires sacrifice. You wouldn't understand. You've never had to save anyone from themselves. Trenna thought of Jessie, of all the women in her case files, of the weight of failure she'd carried for 20 years. I understand more than you think. Inside the cabin, she knew, Ray was recording everything, every word, every threat, every admission. It wasn't enough for a conviction. Not yet, but it was something. Gideon seemed to sense the conversation wasn't going his way. His tone shifted again, became harder. This is your last chance. Cook them out now, and I'll forget about your involvement. We'll leave peacefully, no authorities involved, no consequences for you. But if you refuse, I refuse. His face went cold. Then you leave me no choice. Those women belong to me, to God. And I will take back what's mine, whether you cooperate or not. He stepped forward, and his men moved with him. The moment hung suspended, violence about to break loose, the point of no return. Then Ray Cole emerged from the cabin, deputy at his side, both with weapons drawn but not pointed. That's far enough, Mr. Thorne. Sheriff Raymond Cole, Flathead County. I'm going to need you and your men to stop right there. Gideon froze, genuine surprise crossing his face for the first time. Behind him, his men hesitated, looking to him for direction. "Sheriff," Gideon recovered quickly, his smile returning. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm simply trying to recover 2 members of my community who wandered off during a storm. Surely that's not a matter for law enforcement. When it involves threats, property damage, and credible allegations of abuse, it absolutely is. I've been listening to your conversation with Miss Vale. Very enlightening. I made no threats. You said you'd take back what's yours, whether she cooperates or not. That sounds like a threat to me." Ray pulled out his camera. "I've also documented your admission that you maintained discipline through firmness and sacrifice. Combined with sworn testimony from multiple witnesses about conditions at New Eden, that's enough for me to open a formal investigation." The 2 deputies from outside emerged from their hiding spots, rifles aimed at Gideon's men. The tactical situation had reversed completely. Gideon's men were now surrounded, outnumbered by trained law enforcement. Gideon's face hardened into something ugly. "You have no jurisdiction over New Eden. We're a religious organization, protected by constitutional. Freedom of religion doesn't include the freedom to abuse people," Ray interrupted. "Now, I'm going to ask you and your men to leave this property. If you refuse, I'll arrest all of you for trespassing, harassment, and destruction of property. That barn you burned counts as arson. By the way, you can't prove. We have witnesses, and I'm betting once we start investigating, we'll find evidence. Accelerants, tire tracks, maybe even surveillance footage, if Miss Vale had the foresight to set up cameras. Trenna hadn't, but Gideon didn't know that. She saw doubt flicker across his face. "This isn't over," Gideon said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won something here, but you haven't. Those women made vows before God. They belong to our community, and they always will. This isn't about law, it's about salvation. Right now, it's about you leaving before I arrest you." Ray's voice was steel. "Get in your vehicles and go. Now." For a moment, Trenna thought Gideon might refuse, might push it to actual violence. His men were tense, hands moving toward weapons they might have hidden. The morning air felt electric with potential disaster. Then Gideon smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down Trenna's spine. "Of course, Sheriff, we wouldn't want any trouble. But mark my words, this matter isn't resolved. There are proper channels, legal proceedings. Those women will answer for breaking their commitments, and you," he looked directly at Trenna, "you'll answer for interfering in God's work." He turned and walked back to his truck, his men following. Engines started. One by one, the vehicles turned and headed back down the mountain road. But as the last truck pulled away, Trenna saw someone in the passenger seat looking back. A man with hard eyes and a scarred face, staring directly at her, a promise of violence not yet delivered. The vehicles disappeared around the bend, and silence fell over the property. Ray lowered his weapon. "Well, that was interesting." Alma and Dilly emerged from the cabin, shaking but alive. Dilly ran to Trenna, threw her arms around her. "You did it. You made him leave." "We made him leave," Trenna corrected. "All of us together." But even as she said it, she knew this wasn't over. Gideon had retreated but not surrendered. Men like him didn't give up, they adapted, found new angles, new ways to attack. The war wasn't won. This had been just the opening battle. The celebration, such as it was, lasted about 10 minutes. Then reality set in. Ray Cole gathered everyone inside the cabin. "Okay, let's talk about what happens next. That didn't go the way Thorne wanted, but he's not done. Men like him, they don't accept defeat." "What are our options?" Trenna asked. "Legally, I can open an official investigation into New Eden. With the testimony from Alma and Delia, plus the other witness you found, Patricia Lowell, we might have enough for a warrant. But these things take time. Weeks, maybe. Months." "We don't have months," Alma said. Father Gideon won't wait that long. He'll find another way to get to us. Ray nodded grimly. That's my concern too, which is why I'm suggesting protective custody. We can place you both in a secure location, different identities, full protection until the case is resolved. Like witness protection? Dilly asked. Similar, though not as comprehensive. It would mean leaving here, going somewhere Thorn can't find you. Trenna saw Alma and Dilly exchange glances. After everything they'd been through, the idea of running again clearly didn't sit well. How long would we be hidden? Alma asked. Depends on how long the investigation takes. Could be 6 months, could be a year. And the other women at New Eden? What happens to them while we're hiding? Ray hesitated. That's complicated. Without probable cause for immediate danger, I can't just raid the place. We have to build a case first, get warrants, do everything by the book. Otherwise, anything we find gets thrown out in court. So they stay trapped, Alma said bitterly. All those women still under his control, while we hide and wait for the law to move at its own pace. I know it's not ideal. It's not acceptable. Alma stood, her face set with determination Trenna hadn't seen before. I lived there for 15 years. I know women who are desperate to leave but too afraid to try. If they knew we got out, if they knew there was help available, some of them might find the courage. What are you suggesting? Trenna asked. I don't know exactly. But hiding feels like giving up, like letting Father Gideon win. A knock on the door interrupted them. One of the deputies opened it carefully, then stepped back in surprise. A woman stood outside, thin, mid-30s, with a bruised face and clothes that had clearly been slept in. Please, she said, her voice hoarse. I need help. I came from New Eden. They brought her inside, gave her water, and took food. Her name was Suzanne, and she'd escaped during the confrontation that morning, slipping away while the men were focused on Trenna's cabin. I've wanted to leave for 2 years, she said between sips of water, but I was too scared. Then this morning, when Father Gideon took almost everyone to come here, I saw my chance. I just started walking. I didn't know where I was going. Just followed the road and prayed. You're safe now, Ray assured her. That makes 3 witnesses. Miss Suzanne, would you be willing to testify about conditions at New Eden? Yes. God, yes. Anything to make sure no one else ends up there. Ray looked at Trenna. This changes things. 3 witnesses, all with similar stories, all willing to testify. I can probably get a warrant now, maybe even move on the compound within days. But you have to move fast, Suzanne said urgently. Once Father Gideon realizes I'm gone, he'll tighten security. He'll make sure no one else can leave, and he'll punish anyone he suspects of disloyalty. There are women there, good women who've been kind to me. They'll suffer because I escaped. The weight of that settled over the room. Every minute they delayed meant more women at risk. Trenna stood and walked to the window, thinking hard. Outside, dawn had fully broken, the sky clear and bright. The burned ruins of her barn stood as testament to Gideon's willingness to use violence. An idea was forming, risky and probably insane, but the more she thought about it, the more sense it made. What if we don't wait? She said. Everyone looked at her. What if we go to New Eden ourselves, tonight, while Gideon's off balance? We know the layout, we know the guard rotations, we know where the women are kept. If we could get inside, make contact with the women who want to leave. That's crazy, Ray said. You'd be trespassing on private property, potentially endangering civilians, putting yourselves at huge risk. I can't sanction that as law. Enforcement. I'm not asking you to sanction it. I'm asking you to be ready. If women start leaving New Eden tonight, if they show up in town asking for help, could you protect them? Ray was quiet for a moment. If they come to us voluntarily, seeking protection, then yes, we'd have to take them in, ensure their safety. And if multiple women all tell the same stories about abuse, then you'd have overwhelming probable cause for an immediate raid. Trenna, It's the only way, Alma interrupted. She's right. Waiting means more women get hurt. But if we can get inside, if we can help them escape. She looked at Suzanne. How many women at New Eden would run if they had the chance? At least a dozen, maybe more. There's a group of us who've talked about it quietly when the guards aren't listening. We've planned it, dreamed about it. We just never had the courage. Now you do, Alma said. We'll give you the courage. Dilly stood too. I'm coming, I know. That compound better than anyone. I can get us in and out. Absolutely not, Trenna said. You're not going anywhere near. Yes, I am. Dilly's voice was firm, more adult than Trenna had heard from her. Those women in there, some of them protected me when I was growing up. They took punishments for me, lied for me, kept me safe when Father Gideon's attention turned my way. I owe them. I'm going. Trenna looked at these three women, Alma, Dilly, and Suzanne, all of whom had every reason to never go near New Eden again. Yet all of them were willing to face that fear to help others. It reminded her why she'd become a sheriff in the first place. Okay, she said, but we do this smart. We plan every detail, we have backup ready, and at the first sign of serious danger, we abort. Agreed? They spent the next hours planning. Suzanne drew an updated map showing where the women's dormitories were, where the guards would be posted, where the alarms and locks were located. Ray, though clearly unhappy about the whole thing, agreed to position his deputies on the perimeter of New Eden, ready to move in if things went wrong. And if this works, he said, if you get women out safely, I want them brought directly to the station. We'll provide protection, take statements, and use that as justification to raid the compound officially. But Trenna, if this goes south, if anyone gets hurt, I know. It's on me. As evening approached, they prepared to leave. Trenna checked her weapon, made sure she had the digital recorder hidden in her coat. Alma and Dilly geared up with warm clothes and flashlights. Suzanne would guide them in and help identify which women to approach first. Before they left, Trenna pulled out the photograph of Jessie one more time. Her daughter, frozen in that moment of pure joy, wearing an oversized sheriff's hat. "This is for you," she whispered, "and for all the ones I couldn't save." She tucked the photo in her pocket, right over her. Room, heart. Then she, Alma, Dilly, and Suzanne headed out into the gathering darkness toward New Eden and whatever waited for them there. Behind them, Ray Cole watched them go, radio in hand, praying he wouldn't have to send his deputies in for a rescue. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. Somewhere in those mountains, women were waiting to be freed. And 4 women who'd survived their own hells were about to walk back into one, armed with nothing but courage and the desperate hope that this time, finally, justice might win. It took them 4 hours to reach New Eden, moving carefully through the dark. Suzanne led them to a weak point in the fence she'd discovered during her 2 years of planning, escape a section where the posts had rotted and could be pulled aside. They slipped through one at a time, hearts pounding, and made their way toward the women's dormitory. The compound was laid out exactly as the maps had shown. Main hall in the center, cabins scattered around it, dormitories on the east side. 2 guards, visible, patrolling predictable routes. Trenna signaled the others to wait while she scouted ahead. Years of training came back: how to move silently, how to use shadows, how to assess threats. She timed the guard rotation, found a 3-minute window when the dormitory's back entrance would be unwatched. They moved during that window. Inside, the dormitory was dimly lit by a single bulb. Rows of narrow beds, maybe 20 women sleeping or pretending to sleep. The air smelled of unwashed bodies and fear. Alma moved to the first bed, gently touching the woman's shoulder. The woman's eyes snapped open, and Alma quickly covered her mouth. "It's me, Alma. I got out. We're here to help anyone who wants to leave. Tonight. Right now." Word spread in whispers. Women sat up, disbelief and hope warring on their faces. Some shook their heads, too afraid to move. Others immediately reached for shoes, coats, whatever they had. "Anyone who wants to come, we leave in 5 minutes," Trenna whispered. "Move quietly. Follow us exactly. There's law enforcement waiting outside the compound. You'll be safe." 12 women stood up. 12 out of maybe 25 in that dormitory. Some were young, barely older than Dilly. Others were middle-aged, worn down by years of abuse. All of them terrified, but determined. They filed out through the back entrance, and Trenna led them toward the fence. They were halfway there when a shout went up behind them. A guard had discovered the empty dormitory. "Run!" Trenna commanded. They ran, 14 women crashing through the compound in a desperate sprint for freedom. Lights came on in buildings. More shouts. The sound of boots on gravel, men giving chase. Trenna reached the fence first, held the section open while women poured through. Alma and Dilly helped the slower ones, practically carrying an older woman who could barely walk. Behind them, Father Gideon's voice rang. Out, commanding his men to stop the escapees. Flashlight beams swept across the compound. Trenna was the last one through the fence. As she pulled herself free, she heard Gideon's voice, much closer now. "You! Stop!" She turned and saw him standing 20 feet away, backlit by the compound lights. His face was twisted with rage, all pretense of benevolence gone. "You've destroyed everything," he snarled. "Years of work, years of building, years of abuse," she corrected. "It's over, Thorn. Those women are free. And the law's coming for you." As if summoned, sirens split the night. Ray Cole's deputies, hearing the commotion, were moving in. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. Gideon looked at the lights, then back at Trenna. For a moment, she thought he might rush her, might try to fight, but he was a coward at heart, like most bullies. When faced with actual consequences, he broke. He turned and ran back toward the compound. By the time the deputies arrived, they found 14 women huddled together on the road and Trenna standing guard over them. Within an hour, more law enforcement arrived. State police, FBI agents who'd been quietly building their own case against Gideon Thorn. The raid on New Eden happened at dawn, with warrants and cameras and everything done by the book. They found evidence of fraud, false imprisonment, abuse. They found financial records showing Gideon had been funneling money from the community into offshore accounts. They found a room in his private quarters filled with monitoring equipment. He'd been recording the women, watching them constantly. And in a locked filing cabinet, they found records of the children who'd been adopted out, including a name that made Alma gasp: Daniel Jean, adopted to a family in Oregon 18 years ago. Gideon Thorn was arrested and charged with dozens of counts. His trial would take months, but the outcome was never in doubt. Too many witnesses, too much evidence, too many voices finally speaking truth. The women who'd escaped were placed in temporary housing, given medical care and counseling. Patricia Lowell and her daughter Emma drove up from Whitefish to help coordinate support services, sharing what they'd learned about rebuilding after New Eden. 2 weeks later, Trenna sat on her porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The barn was still just ruins, but she'd started clearing the debris. She'd rebuild it in the spring. Alma came out with 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside her. Dilly was inside, reading. She was working through books at an astonishing rate, making up for years of denied education. "I heard from Oregon today," Alma said quietly. "The family who adopted Daniel. They're willing to meet with me." "That's good. I don't know if he'll want to see me. He might not even remember me. He might. And if he doesn't, you'll deal with that. But at least you'll know." Alma nodded, tears sliding down her face. "Thank you. For everything. You saved our lives. We saved each other's lives. That's how it works." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned gold and pink and purple. Somewhere down in town, 12 women were learning how to live free. Somewhere in Oregon, a young man was processing the news that his mother hadn't abandoned him, that she'd been forced to give him up and had spent 18 years wondering if he was alive. Somewhere in Washington, Patricia and Emma Lowell were probably sitting on their own porch, watching the same sunset, glad they'd found the courage to speak up. And in a federal detention center, Gideon Thorne sat in a cell, his power finally broken, his victims finally believed. It wasn't a perfect ending. Some of the women from New Eden would struggle for years with trauma, some would never fully recover. And there were other communities like New Eden out there, other predators hiding behind religion and charisma. But tonight, 14 women were free who hadn't been free yesterday. That mattered. That was something. Dilly came out onto the porch, a book in her hand. Trenna, what does indomitable mean? It means unbeatable, unable to be defeated. Like you, Dilly said simply. Trenna smiled. Like all of us. She pulled out the photograph of Jessie, looked at that bright smile one more time. She thought about the daughter she'd lost, the women she'd failed to save, the guilt she'd carried for so long. And she thought about the women she had saved, the lives that had been changed, the future that was now possible. I did it, she whispered to the photograph. Finally, I did it right. Alma put her arm around Trenna's shoulders. Dilly leaned against them both. 3 women who'd been broken, now healing together. 3 women who'd found family not in blood, but in shared survival and stubborn hope. The mountains held their secrets still, but they also held this, a cabin where 3 mismatched coffee mugs sat on a kitchen table, where laughter sometimes replaced tears, where women who'd escaped their own hells had built something new. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. And that was enough. As full darkness fell, Trenna stood and checked the locks one last time, an old habit she'd probably never break. But the fear behind the habit was different now. Not paralysis, but awareness. Not running, but readiness. She'd spent 20 years hiding from life. Now she was living it again, with all its risks and rewards. Inside, she hung her badge on the wall beside Jessie's photograph. 2 pieces of her history, no longer sources of shame, but reminders of why she kept fighting. Alma was teaching Dilly to cook, the 2 of them laughing over a recipe neither quite understood. Trenna joined them, and they worked together to make dinner, just 3 women in a small cabin, making soup on a winter night. It was ordinary and precious, and exactly what they all needed. Later, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, after Dilly had gone to sleep and Alma had settled in with her journal, Trenna stepped outside one more time. The stars were brilliant, the air sharp and clean. The ruins of the barn were dark shapes against the snow. In the spring, she'd rebuild. Not alone this time, Alma and Dilly would help. Maybe some of the other women too. They'd make something new from what had been destroyed. She thought about the women still out there, in other compounds, other situations, other traps. She couldn't save them all, but she could save some. And that was worth something. Tomorrow, Sheriff Cole was coming by to discuss her possibly working as a consultant on trafficking cases. He said her experience and skills were too valuable to waste. She hadn't decided yet, but she was considering it. For now, though, she just stood in the cold and the dark and the quiet, feeling the weight of the past start to lift, feeling the possibility of the future start to settle. She'd lost her daughter. She'd failed. Women she'd tried to protect. She'd run from the pain for 20 years, but she'd also saved lives, made a difference, found a kind of redemption she hadn't thought possible. And she'd learned that family wasn't always the one you were born into. Sometimes it was the one you built from broken pieces, the one you chose despite everything, the one that found you when you needed it most. She went back inside, locked the door, and joined Alma by the fire. Dilly was snoring softly in the loft above. The cabin was warm and safe and full. Trenna picked up her own book and settled into her chair, Alma beside her, both women reading in comfortable silence while snow began to fall outside. It was enough. It was everything.